Welcome everyone to today's Cultivating Success webinar. Today's topic is taking eggs to market, safe egg handling and delivery. Cultivating Success is a partnership of University of Idaho Extension, the nonprofit organization Rural Roots, and the Washington State Food Systems Program. I'm Colette DePhelps. I'll be your presenter today. I'm an area educator in community food systems located in North Idaho on the Moscow campus. Mackenzie Lawrence is going to be our moderator today. She's an administrative coordinator for the Cultivating Success Program and also other University of Idaho community food systems and small farms projects. A couple of webinar tips before we get started. First, if you're having any troubles with bandwidth, go ahead and close the other programs that are running on your computer that could help you with sound and the speed of the slides changing. At any time, you can switch to the phone for your audio. The call-in number is in the welcome email that provided the link to this webinar. If you do call in, please mute your computer. That's going to help you because you won't be getting feedback from both audio systems. At any time, you can type questions for me into the Q&A box, and we'll have time throughout the webinar where I will stop and answer those questions. We also have a chat box, and if you're having any problems with sound or speed, you can go ahead and type into the chat box. And throughout the webinar, I may ask you some questions and ask you to put some information in the chat box. All of the handouts from today's presentation are going to be available on the Cultivating Success website, and I will show you where to find those and other resources later on in the webinar. So with that, here's the topics that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to start out talking about safe egg handling. Then I'm going to move in and talk about what are the specific rules in Idaho for taking eggs to market. Following that, I'll talk a bit about COVID-19 safety considerations and different marketing options. And then I'll wrap up the webinar talking about some things related to liability and how you can protect your personal and farm assets if you decide to sell eggs. With this, it'd be really helpful for me if you could take a minute to go to the chat and type in where you are at in this whole process of taking eggs to market. Are you already taking eggs to market? Are you thinking about doing it? Are you just in the planning, brainstorming phase? So what is it that you are thinking about in terms of eggs, and what questions do you have for today? I'd like to refer to those throughout the webinar. So you'll find that chat box in the control panel that is usually at the bottom of your screen, but depending on your setup, it can be at the top or on the side. So if you can just take a couple minutes, that would be great. Okay, I'm going to start out, like I said, talking about safety concerns. And one of the primary safety concerns related to eggs is Salmonella. And so Salmonella is a non-spore forming biofilm producing rod, as you can see in this picture. It's a type of bacteria, and it can cause two types of illness. The non-typhoidal type of illness causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headache, and it's self-limiting, which it means it usually resolves itself. There is a more severe form that causes typhoidal fever, and that is something that is much more serious and can cause death. What we see is that Salmonella is commonly present in nature. It's in the soil, it's in the intestines of wildlife, in the intestines of livestock, so birds, chicken, other kinds of poultry, and that we can see cross-contamination from production through what we call post-harvest water. In terms of eggs, that's thinking about when you're washing your eggs and if anything is pulled through that shell with the wash water, and we're going to talk about that. So while we do see it in produce, it is a major concern when we're talking about eggs and poultry. And I wanted to point out that Dr. Stephanie Smith, who's a consumer food safety specialist at Washington State University, She provided this information on Salmonella, and she would be a great resource if you have any other questions about any type of foodborne diseases related to egg handling and specifics of those diseases. So let's talk a little bit about the production area. That's where your food safety protocols actually start, because the cleaner your production area, the cleaner your eggs are, the less you're going to have to deal with those in terms of taking them to market. So you really want to make sure that your chicken house is dry and floor litter is in good condition, that you're cleaning the nest regularly, you're replacing and replenishing those nest materials as needed so that those nesting boxes are clean. You don't want your birds mounted, your perches mounted over your nesting area, because you don't want those feces dropping into the nesting areas. I've even heard of producers who do things to discourage their birds from being in that nesting area for a very long time. And you want to have a plan to control other carriers of Salmonella into the production area. So how are you going to exclude rodents, thinking about flies, beetles, other wild birds and cats that might come into that area? So you do want to keep it clean, and you want to keep other animals out, which is also part of the safety for your birds. So it's likely that you're doing that anyway. Store your feed in containers that will prevent contamination, and make sure that the containers that you're feeding your birds in for water and food are clean, and that you're also keeping those materials in an area other than where your eggs are washed. And then you do want to clean and sanitize your chicken house at least once a year. And there are sanitizers that can be used on wood, and I will talk about sanitizers a bit later in the presentation. So one of the key things too about the production area is that you want to make sure that you're only collecting eggs from your nesting boxes, that you're not collecting eggs for human consumption from other areas. You may collect them to destroy them. If your birds are randomly laying in another area, you definitely want to clean up that spot so it's not a place that they find ideal to lay. But definitely make sure that you are collecting your eggs from your defined production area. It's best, if you can, to collect eggs a minimum of once a day, and definitely it's better if you can do it 2 to 3 times a day. So you're not leaving your eggs out where it might be hot. You are knowing that you're taking them out of that environment where you might have more feces or interaction with your birds or different birds with those eggs. So you can have a really good collecting regime. That would be great. They mentioned only collect eggs from known regularly monitored and maintained nesting boxes. And personally, I have bought eggs from a couple different farms that did not do that. And when I went to crack eggs, I had very well-formed chicks in my eggs. And as a customer, that's extremely distressing and a great way to lose customers, but also the retailer that I did buy some of those eggs for, when I let them know that I found that, then they would no longer carry the eggs from that farm. Because if eggs are not being collected regularly and handed in a way that protects food safety, that's a lot of risk. So that's risk for you as the producer. It's also risk for whatever outlet that you're selling your eggs through. You want to discard any eggs with broken or cracked shells, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in egg quality. And then soon after collecting, you're going to want to clean those eggs. So you don't want to cool the eggs below 55 degrees before you actually clean them, because refrigerated eggs could then crack in that cleaning process. So you want to store them in a cool place, and as soon as possible to clean those eggs before refrigerating. So when you're cleaning eggs, number one thing, to wash your hands with soap and potable water. So potable water is water that has the quality that it is drinking water. So you want to wash your hands before and after cleaning eggs. In this time of COVID-19, I would also recommend that you wash your hands and then you use a hand sanitizer. You also want to clean and sanitize is the egg cleaning and packing area, and I'll go into more about cleaning and sanitizing a little bit later. And then you'll inspect your eggs to determine if cleaning is necessary. And then minimal cleaning protects the natural protective covering on the shell. And let's talk about, how do you know when an egg needs to be cleaned? So according to the Idaho Food Code, and you see the link to that code in this slide, eggs have to meet the U.S. Consumer Grade B designation for standard of eggs. If they don't meet that, then they are not fit to be sold. And we'll look at in some detail about what that U.S. standard is. Okay, so the shell must be unbroken. It can be abnormal in shape, and it can be slightly stained, but only moderately stained areas are permitted. So when you're thinking about this, less than 1/32 of the entire shell if it's a localized stain, or 1/16 of the shell surface if it's scattered around the shell. So you can't sell eggs that have a prominent stain or any adhering dirt. And that also includes the bedding or feces that might be stuck on the outside of the cell or the shell when you collected it. Also, there's quality standards that are related to the air sail, the movement of the yolk, and I'm going to provide you with a resource that goes into all of these details in depth that talk about what a B quality egg is, and then you can also look at what the other quality standards are. So there's a lot of variation that's available in a B quality egg. For instance, the color of the yolk and the size of the yolk, how firm that is. And you can have small blood spots or meat spots, but as you can see, they need to be 1/8 of an inch in diameter or less. A little bit more about USDA standards. So as I mentioned, there is this actual standard around what is a dirty egg, but there's also a standard about what is a check egg. So a check egg is an individual egg that has a broken shell or a crack in the shell, but its membrane is intact, so its contents do not leak out. And as I'll show you later in the slide, you can have a minimum amount of check eggs in the eggs that go for sale. But again, that would probably not be a best practice in terms of your relationship with your customer. So I would recommend taking those out of any eggs that are going to market. Again, I'm providing you with a link, and we will put this document up on the website with the recording of this webinar. So you'll be able to look more in depth at these USDA standards, which Idaho does hold people to that standard for selling eggs. So there's a couple of different ways that you can clean eggs. One of them is dry cleaning. And so that's where you take your egg and a very fine sandpaper brush or emery cloth, and you just remove that dirt and debris from the eggs very gently. You don't want to use rags or sponges that are wet to clean or scrub the eggs, and you kind of consider this dry cleaning because you don't want to damage the protective aspects of the shell, but you do want it to remove whatever debris is attached to them. To check at candling eggs, you can look for the defects on the shell and inside the shell by just holding it up to a bright light. And you can sell B quality eggs that do have an abnormal shape, but again, think about your market. You might want to put those to the side for home use and put your most nicely shaped eggs in your market crate. You also want to look for those spots that we talked about or other irregularities and make sure that they fit those B standards. So wet cleaning, it's really important to use potable water. If you're using well water, you do need to perform an annual bacteriological test to make sure that that water is potable. And then your water temperature is also super important. So water temperature for both washing and rinsing should be controlled by a thermostat. And generally speaking, you are going to have that on your hot water tank, and you're going to be able to use a thermometer to test that water temperature. You want to maintain the wash water at 90 degrees Fahrenheit or above, and the wash water really needs to be at least 20 degrees warmer than the temperature of the eggs, so that you are not reverse pulling any contaminants from outside the egg to the inside of the egg. So you're going to want to use a thermometer, and this is why you don't want to refrigerate your eggs before you wash them. You want to wash them at room temperature so that you probably have, less than a 20-degree differential. So when you're using that water, you can use a spray bottle filled with potable water and then, very carefully wiping dry with a single service paper towel, so you're not creating any transfer between egg to egg. So that's important. Or you can briefly rinse them with running water and immediately wipe them dry with a single service paper towel. You don't want to submerge your eggs in water or any other solution, because if that shell gets wet, bacteria can pass through the shell. So you're doing a minimum amount of water contact. And so those shells are also porous. So you don't want to use cleaners that are not food grade and not approved through the label for shell egg cleaning. And you don't want to use anything that's going to actually go through the shell and then create, off flavors. And you don't want to store them in a way in an area where you're going to have something else with a strong odor, even if that's, another kind of produce or something that is in your same refrigerated space, because you don't want to change the flavor of that egg. And you need to hold cleaned eggs in sanitary conditions with refrigeration at 45 degrees Fahrenheit or less. So before I go on to egg packaging, are there any questions about the egg cleaning?
Yeah, we do have one question that has come in. North Star Farm asks, do we need to do both wet and dry cleaning or just one?
So you don't need to do both. You just need to remove that debris from your eggs, and you'll need to make an assessment of whether that's most efficient based on, how dirty your eggs are, whether you can do that within a dry cleaning where you're just using like that very light sandpaper or a brush, and that adequately takes anything off of the eggs, or if you really need to go the next level and be using a wet cleaning method. So you wouldn't need to do both unless the dry cleaning is not adequate. And I do want to say that if you are in Washington, I am giving specific egg rules for Idaho. I did show you the US standards, but Washington does have their own rules around eggs, and I can make sure to include in the slide handout version of this webinar some links to what those rules are in Washington, because we have actually very different systems around eggs. So I just want to put that out, since I know Lopez Island is in Washington.
Great,
and
thank
so,
you.
Okay, great. And as I move into talking about packaging and these Idaho regulations, I need to say that Washington is going to have some different regulations, as will other states. So if you are from outside of Idaho, you're definitely going to need to check what the rules are in your state. And egg packaging is one of those things where you might find that in your state you have different rules than in Idaho. Because under Idaho rules and regulations, fiber cartons can be reused if they're clean. In terms of myself as an extension educator and a food safety educator, I do not recommend that as best practice, because you cannot guarantee that used egg cartons are free from microbial and chemical contaminants. You don't know how they've been stored. You don't know what they've been around. They're coming back to you through a number of hands. So that's really not the best practice. However, in Idaho, that is allowed. I do not believe that that is allowed in Washington. And if you are reusing cartons in Idaho, you do need to remove the packing information from the label. You need to blacken out all the other dates and the packer's names and all that contact information, because as you'll see later, you need to label it with your own. And then you also need to talk to your buyers, because some buyers will require the use of new egg cartons. So even if you have state rules or health district rules that allow you to use used cartons, then that might not be what your buyer allows. And it's generally because of a food safety concern. So I'm going to go into some more details about Idaho's egg regulations. And if you are from another state, just go ahead and put what state you are from into the Q&A or the chat box, and we will make sure to provide links to the rules in your state. So in Idaho, if you have 300 or less laying hens, you may sell ungraded shell eggs direct to consumers and retailers. So you're selling a shell egg is a whole intact egg. And your eggs must be clean according to the US standards that we talked about, and your containers need to be labeled. So the labeling of egg cartons in Idaho, you are required to put your name, your physical address, so that's your full physical address and your zip code in case somebody needed to follow up with you regarding your eggs. And then you need to have safe handling instructions. So as you can see, they use a stamp in this particular, on this particular carton. I've seen other cartons where it's a sticker, but it says to prevent illness from bacteria, keep eggs refrigerated, cook eggs until yolks are firm, and cook foods containing eggs thoroughly. Then you also need to have this statement, ungraded eggs. So we talked a little bit about this USDA consumer bee, egg standard. So in Idaho, it specifically says that shell eggs shall be received, and that's received by the buyer, clean and sound, and cannot exceed that restricted egg tolerance for US consumer grade B. It also says that no more than 10% are dirty, check eggs, or otherwise unfit for consumption. So in this, again, we talked about those tolerances for dirt, but also this is where you can have a small amount of your product that is a check egg. So that's roughly 1 per dozen could be a check egg. But again, that might not be, well, if it meets the rules of Idaho, it might not meet the standards of your customer. So that would be something to consider. Proper egg handling and delivery is important, and this is regardless of whether your customer is someone at a farmer's market or you're delivering to a retailer or a restaurant. So in Idaho, if you have 300 laying hens or less, you can sell direct to the consumer, also direct to restaurants and direct to retailers. But you have to make sure that your eggs are stored at 45 degrees Fahrenheit or less. And that's not only on your farm or in your home, it's also in transport so that when they are received by the buyer, they are at an ambient air temperature of 45 degrees or less. And when you sell to a food establishment, such as a restaurant, they have to inform their customer that those eggs that they've bought are ungraded. And they can do that in many ways. It could be a menu board, table, placard, or other means, just making sure that a customer knows about that. There's also this sheet that is an ungraded shell or table eggs egg exemption sheet. And this is a sheet that you can get from your local health department in Idaho. And you need to fill this out and provide this to your buyer. So as you can see, that you are supplying these ungraded shell eggs to, and you are essentially saying that you have met these requirements for the consumer grade B standards. And so your buyer will be able to have this document on hand if they had a visit by the health department. So I'm going to pause there because next I'm going to go into talking about eggs and COVID-19. So are there any other questions about Idaho rules, where you can find information?
I don't see any questions at the moment.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go in and talking a little bit about COVID-19 and best practices for handling and taking eggs to market during this time of this pandemic. So just a couple of slides to remind us about COVID-19. So COVID-19 is a respiratory virus, and it's spread through person-to-person contact via respiratory droplets. That's why we have a social distancing of 6 feet or greater, because the greater likelihood of spread is when people are interacting in close contact, so less than 6 feet. And if those respiratory droplets are being transferred through coughing or sneezing, it could be talking and possibly breathing. So at that close distance, that any way you can move those through the air into someone else and they're taking them into their respiratory tract. So there is a possibility that the coronavirus, which is the virus that causes the COVID-19 disease, can be also spread by touching a contaminated surface and then touching your mouth, nose, or eyes. We know this is not a primary method of infection. And we also know that the virus does not grow on surfaces. So we do know it survives up to 24 hours on cardboard and 2 to 3 days on plastic or stainless steel. It is not a foodborne pathogen, and it is extremely unlikely that somebody will be infected through eating. But the virus may be spread by people who are not showing symptoms. So when you are handling your eggs, it's best practice if you wear a cloth mask and make sure that it fits properly. If you are not presenting, symptoms of the virus, this is gonna be helpful, because maybe you don't know and you're still handling eggs, and those eggs could go to market before you actually present symptoms. So if you wear a cloth mask and make sure it fits properly, that's important to do while you're doing your handling and cleaning of eggs, and also when you're doing your deliveries at market, or whether that's working at a farm stand or doing deliveries. It's also important that you wash your hands before and after handling your eggs, and that you wash them properly, and that's scrubbing your hands for a minimum of 20 seconds and using soap. And if you can use warm water, then that is better. You definitely need to use potable water. And to understand that hand sanitizer is not a replacement for hand washing. You need to remove the dirt and grime and oils from your hands and then use hand sanitizer. And you want to use hand sanitizer that's commercially produced and contains greater than 60% of alcohol. So a little bit of talking about cleaning and sanitizing food contact surfaces. So cleaning is where you remove the dirt and debris. And so to do that, you need to use soap and potable water. You need to scrub and remove that. Let's say you have a packing table and the place where you're going to clean your eggs. You want to clean it, and then you want to apply that detergent, scrub it, rinse it with clean potable water, and then apply a sanitizer that is approved for use on food contact surfaces. So where would you find that? So here is a website. It's an EPA website, and it lists sanitizers that are approved for food contact surfaces. And you have to follow the direction on the label for sanitizing and disinfecting. And so this is a great website to help you find what those products are. Bleach is an approved sanitizer, but not all bleach is. So the bleach actually has to say on the label that it is approved for food grade uses. And so you're going to want to check that label, and you're going to want a bleach, of course, that does not have any type of perfumes or dyes in it. So you'll want to read that label, make sure that it is approved for food contact surfaces, and then you can use a solution that's up to 1/3 of a cup of bleach per gallon of water, or 4 teaspoons of bleach per quart of water. If you're using alcohol and you're spraying that on a surface, it needs to be greater than 70% alcohol. You can use ethanol or isopropyl alcohol. There are some over-the-counter disinfectants, so Clorox multi-surface cleaner plus bleach, Clorox disinfecting wipes, and Lysol disinfecting wipes. We do have several webinars in our Cultivating Success series that have been recorded that go into great depth about sanitizers and disinfectants and how to use them. I only have a few minutes on this webinar, and so in the slide deck that we provide you, where I put the additional resources, I will also list out the specific webinars that we have. Our farmers market webinar happens to be the one that goes into great depth about sanitizers. So talking about on-farm, on-site sales. So now I'm kind of taking this whole piece together of proper egg handling, but also considerations in COVID-19. So if you are going to do on-farm or on-site sales, you need a well-designated pickup location and to let people know when your hours are and where that location is on your property. And if you can, like in this picture, you want to put that location at the edge of your property where somebody doesn't really have to go far into your property to pick up. So that's going to prevent any potential contaminants from coming into your property. You're going to want to use signage at the pickup site on how people are supposed to handle your product. If you have the ability to have a portable hand washing station, that would be excellent to ask people to wash their hands before they actually open your cooler if it's going to be self-serve. It'd be great to have a payment box if they can pay with exact amounts of cash or pay by a check, or if you have the possibility to have them pay online before pickup, that again would be ideal. So all of those things are really important in terms of thinking about coronavirus and minimizing contact with any surfaces that could be contaminated. You're also going to want to make sure that you are washing and sanitizing any of your equipment before you put your eggs into it. So for instance, this cooler situation, you would want to have washed and sanitized that with an improved sanitizer. You put in your eggs and you also put in enough ice or ice packs that you can maintain an ambient air temperature of 45 degrees or less. And really the only way you're going to be able to monitor that is if you have an actual temperature gauge in your cooler to be able to do that. If you are on site, you want to maintain social distancing and wear a mask. It's also a great idea to ask your customers to wear a mask too when they come to pick up product. If you are on site, you may want to periodically sanitize between those customers coming. If it's more in a model where they're driving up, you have specific hours and you're going to actually place the eggs in their vehicle and have them stay in their vehicle. Then if they have an option to pop their trunk for you, we suggest that you put them in the trunk, otherwise in the back seat. You can use drop boxes at different locations, but again, you're really going to have to make sure that you have that temperature dialed in. And like I said, if you can take online payments, that would be excellent, and restrict other access to other areas of your property. Again, we do have a webinar that goes more in depth on on-farm sales that we can provide you that information to look at that in more depth. A few things about farmers markets. Number one, understand your market policies. We are working with a lot of farmers markets right now, and they are really modifying their rules to maintain social distancing and best practices for COVID-19. So know those rules and follow those rules, and ask your customers to do that as well. And if you have policies in addition to those market rules, or you would want to put those very clear and visible at your market stand. You are going to need to make sure that you hold eggs at the proper temperature. And again, you're looking at 45 degrees Fahrenheit or less in a cooler with a thermometer. If you can maintain social distancing as much as possible, that's the best recommendation. At market, you are going to be doing transactions. So you need to wear a mask and ask your customers to wear a mask. With gloves, there's, you can use disposable gloves, but you really need to be careful about how you take those gloves on and off so you don't cause contamination as you're doing that. So we are recommending that you have a portable hand washing station at your market booth. In our COVID-19 resources on the Cultivating Success website, we have several schematics on how to build a portable, low-cost hand washing station. So we have a couple of documents and a short video, and those resources will be available to you. Also have hand sanitizer so you can sanitize between your customers. We also recommend that you don't use a tablecloth at market at this time, that you use a table that you can clean and sanitize periodically throughout the day. And if you are sick or someone in your household is sick, or if you've been in contact with an ill person, stay home. And this may mean that you need to have a contingency plan so that you have somebody else available to go to market for you if that is needed. And that's also important to have a backup delivery plan if you're doing egg deliveries. So eggs, again, if you're delivering them, we're in the same situation of holding them at proper temperature. One thing nice about deliveries is you can absolutely avoid interaction. Still do wear a mask. There happens to be, you know, people are out, you might be crossing with your customers, but one thing you can do is with deliveries, you can schedule a delivery time or a delivery window. And you can ask those customers that you're delivering to, if they're a home customer, to prepay or to leave you a check or exact change in whatever, you know, in an envelope at the site of pickup in that container. And then ask your customer to leave a cooler or another container out for you to put those eggs in. And when you've done your delivery, you can easily confirm that by phone or text. You know, just send them a quick text. I just delivered your eggs. You know, please come out and get those. If you do accept used egg cartons, which you can do in Idaho, have a plan for isolating those cartons for at least 72 hours. Because remember that coronavirus could be viable on some surfaces up to 72 hours. So if you have a plan that you're isolating them, at least in terms of, you know, coronavirus, you have a die-off period, then you can take those out and you can inspect them to make sure that they're clean and adequate to be reused. With retail and restaurant customers, you can always leave an invoice and have them pay you by check or on an online policy or an online format, but learn in advance their delivery policies, because grocery stores and restaurants will have a policy about how they want to accept product from local producers. And they're going to be thinking about the safety of their employees and their customers. So know what they need in advance, be able to work with them so that your policies are complementing each other. Any questions before I jump into the next piece?
I don't see any questions right now.
Okay, great. If any questions come up, please just go ahead and type them in the Q&A box or into the chat. So now I'm going to go into talking about protecting your personal assets, your farm, and your customers. And this is something that sometimes people don't think about when they're thinking about, oh, I'm just getting into egg production. I love chickens. I'm producing eggs for my family. I'm thinking about giving them to my friends, and maybe, I have so many, I just want to sell a few. Well, when you move into a market situation, you move into a business situation. And I'm going to talk about what that means. So I'm not providing legal advice. This is information that is just to help you identify your potential legal and financial risks as you move into commercial production. And then I'm going to give you some tools that you can use to mitigate those legal and financial risks, and then where to go for more information. So whether you have an official farm business or you have a backyard flock that you want to start taking eggs to market, it's really important for you to protect your personal assets and your farm assets. So if you think about it, if there was somebody who felt that they got sick from your egg, you could actually be liable for that sickness. And we're going to talk about what that means kind of at a very high level and some tools that you could use. So I'm going to talk about forming the best business entity, because once you start to sell things, you have moved into being in business. Even if it's a very small enterprise, you've started an egg business. I'm going to talk about insurance and liability insurance, why that is important, and also what it means to really know and follow the rules, and why that is important in terms of protecting yourself from liability. And then just more about how to think about food safety as a win-win. So there's really two forms of business entities that we commonly see within small acreage agriculture. One is a sole proprietorship or partnership, and the other is a limited liability company. So sole proprietorship or a partnership, by default, this is how many farms begin. People are individuals, they start taking something to market, they have formed no legal business entity, and as such, they are a sole proprietor. And in that, generally speaking, people that are sole proprietors are not separating their business and their personal finances. And because they don't have a separate business established and their finances separate, then in the case of some type of lawsuit that might come against them for harm, personal assets are available to satisfy business liabilities. And if you're in a partnership with someone else, the personal assets of both partners are available to satisfy those liabilities. And so it's not usually recommended by attorneys and accountants to operate any type of agriculture or agricultural business as a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And again, this is because it makes your personal assets at risk. So if you think about this, think, well, I'm only selling a few dozen eggs. True, you're only selling a few dozen eggs. It seems like it's a lot of work to think about a business structure. However, if somebody got sick from some of those eggs, it's often not the individual that actually goes into some type of litigation. It's the insurance company that would be doing that to recoup any financial losses that they had on behalf of their client. And so that's where it's like, well, I'm just selling to my friends. Well, my friends would never, they would never sue me. But if it goes into their insurance system, it's really out of their hands. So that's why this is something to really think about. There is a way to separate your personal and your business finances by forming a limited liability company. And this is a really simple thing to do in Idaho and in other states as well. In Idaho, you fill out a very simple form and you register your business with the Secretary of State. And this creates a liability wall between your personal assets and your business asset. You can file your taxes, this limited liability corporation, under your own Social Security number, or you can easily get an employee identification number from the state. It's a really simple, inexpensive process. But one of the key things that you need to do when you form a limited liability company is to separate your business finances and your personal finances, because if they're meshed together, in the case of a claim being brought against you, your personal assets and your business assets will have been mixed. And so this limited liability company would not help you. So you want to create your own bank account and your own provisions for that. And I'll show you where you can find some resources to be able to look at how to do that in Idaho. We'll also search out how to do that in other states for people who are located in other states and on the webinar today. So sometimes it's hard to take the time to do this business formation and to explore and decide what type of business entity is right for you. But you really need to do that to protect your assets and to weigh your risks. If you decide not to do that in the end, that would be your personal decision, but it would be an informed decision. And again, when you look at it, you really need to separate your business and personal finances. And that's going to help you overall to really understand too, if you're moving into a commercial operation, are you making money? Are you breaking even with this production of eggs? We have a great short course that it was recorded on the Cultivating Success website that's called Financial Fitness for Farmers, and it goes through some key financial statements that you would want to be developing if you are going into business that will help you understand what your business finances are and how to allocate those. So we do have resources to help you do that. So it's really important to keep records and submit any reports that you have to the state or other entities on time. So business entity resources, your state is going to have resources that are going to help you think through forming a small business. Here in Idaho, this is the link to really look at questions about starting a business in Idaho and then how to move forward on something like a limited liability corporation. Another tool is insurance, and farmcommons.org is a nonprofit organization. It's a national organization, and the people that work there are attorneys that specialize in ag and ag law. And so they put out some amazing resources to help you understand what your insurance options are and how to navigate insurance. So this is what I would consider as one of your number one go-to resources to learn more about insurance options. I'm going to give you a pretty high-level view of insurance today. But insurance is really helping you create a barrier between yourself and your assets, whether those are your personal assets or your business assets, in the event that somebody gets sick and thinks it's from your product. So when you want to make sure that you have not been negligent, and that's really making sure that you are doing best practices like we talked about today in terms of food safety, and that you're documenting what you do. And if you have people that are working for you, that you've trained them on those best practices and that you've documented that you've trained them on those best practices. So you're really showing that you've been doing your due diligence to protect your customers. And then if you can afford to purchase liability insurance that covers your farm and your products, that's the next level of protection. And insurance can be tricky, especially when you move into looking for insurance for your small business. And so you need to determine what type of coverage that you need, and does the policy that you purchase provide that coverage? So for instance, maybe you need a farm liability policy because you're having people come on your farm to pick up product. So you have an on-farm stand, that's where they're picking up their eggs. You want to make sure that you're covered if somebody twists their ankle, falls down, injures themselves, that you have a liability policy that protects you from them being on your farm doing that commercial activity. You might need a commercial policy that has some protections that are related to selling into a retail or restaurant market. And so this takes quite a bit of research. There are some different insurance agencies that have specific policies for small farms. And I can, if you want more information, you can contact me directly, and I can tell you what a few of the farmers that we've worked with have researched and what they use. I can't recommend an insurance company, but I can tell you what farmers have told me has been helpful to them, and you can follow up and see if that would be a good option for you. You do want to do full disclosure about what you do. So when you're searching for insurance, like list everything that you do, full disclosure, talk to your agent, and look at different policies and ask them where your activity that you're doing is covered in the policy. Sometimes agents don't know a lot about agriculture, and they may think that you're covered until you ask where it is in the policy and they can't find it. And this is nothing bad about the agent. It's just that some insurance companies are not used to working with small farms or entrepreneurs that have a business on their property. So you definitely want to make sure that you get a policy that works for you. And if they say it's covered, make sure that you have that in writing. And there are some financial things to consider about insurance because, insurance, depending on what you get, farmers are telling me that insurance can be $250 to $350 a year for the type of liability insurance that they've got for their farms and their products. So it's a significant investment, and there's a threshold that you may need to get to before you can afford to actually purchase insurance. On the other side, there are markets that are going to require insurance. And I would not be surprised if you went to a restaurant or a retailer and they would require that you provided a certificate that showed that you had liability insurance. And again, that might not even be something that the individuals, the management of that business require, but it might be something that their insurance company requires. So there's a bigger chain that's always happening around insurance. Again, Farm Commons has some great videos and printed materials that can help you understand insurance and know what questions to ask. In terms of laws and regulations, you are responsible for knowing the laws and regulations in your state, your county, and your municipality, and following those requirements. You might also be required to have some licensing. And again, those are things that you can find out through your different local agencies and your state Department of Ag, your regional health department. And then just a couple of things to keep in mind is that navigating this legal and insurance environment can actually be pretty frustrating at times. So just be patient and friendly. This is sometimes new to everyone. It takes a while to be able to find information. Sometimes things are a bit vague and you have to ask for clarification. And then follow up those conversations with an email so you have it in writing. Restate what you heard people to say. Ask for confirmation that your understanding is correct. And then keep a copy of that for your record, because that will show that you are doing your due diligence as an egg producer to follow the rules, understand them, protect your customers. And that is showing that you are not negligent, that you are doing a great job. And having a food safety plan can also be extremely beneficial. And so a food safety plan is not something that's huge and onerous. It's really thinking through the topics in this webinar. So think about what you're doing on farm, how you can protect food safety. How does that move through the transportation processes that you have around your product into what you do at market? So you want to identify, here's what I do, here's the potential food safety risks in what I do, here's what I'm doing to address those risks. And then finally, you want to think about a recall plan. So that's traceability. So how are you going to label the batches of your eggs so that if somebody gives you a call and says, I think I got sick from this carton of eggs that I got at farmer's market last Saturday, May 30th. And you can say, okay, I've identified, tell me, you might put a batch code on each batch of eggs that you have. And then you can go back and say, okay, let me look at my records about how I handled those eggs. And then you can establish, here's all of the things I did to protect food safety during that. And unpacking what you've done to protect food safety could be enough that it becomes evident that it's very unlikely that somebody got sick from your product. And so you want to be able to develop that traceability system. And then for yourself, perform a mock recall. You might just call one of your customers that you have a good relationship with and say, I have a food safety plan. I'm just doing a test on it to make sure everything's in place, working well. Can you give me this batch number that was on that, carton of eggs that I delivered to you? And then you can take that number, take it back through your system, make sure that you can provide the records that are establishing your practices with that specific batch of eggs. Again, we do have a webinar that's all about developing an on-farm food safety safety plan that will go into more detail, for instance, on how you would even develop a batch number. You can always contact me. I'd be happy to help you with that personally as well. So with that, that is the content of today's webinar. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
There haven't been any more questions that have come in yet, Colette. We might want to give it a moment or two if folks are typing.
Okay, great. Meanwhile, I will show you, here's some Idaho resources in terms of the food code and contact its State Department of Agriculture related to eggs. Again, we will provide those. I saw that we had Washington and Utah on this call today, so we will provide that information in the slide deck that we put online for Washington and Utah. We also have a couple of general food safety resources here. So as you can see, these are from University of Minnesota's extension program and also Maryland's extension program. So I will make sure that these things are available to you as well. We'll have those links with this webinar recording and the slide deck on the Cultivating Success website. So this is the picture of the main page of the Cultivating Success webinar website. If you go to this tab, recorded webinars, click on that, you'll be able to find all of the different webinars I referred to today. We have a section that is specific to COVID-19 resources that talk about different delivery options, different markets, and then we have a very extensive web page that if you click on this button, COVID-19 resources, you can go through, and that's where you'll find information about the hand washing station, different provisions to consider, pretty much all different market avenues related to COVID-19 and food safety. So I am sorry that I did not get the evaluation for this webinar link into the slide deck. That will be in a thank you email that will come to your email address tomorrow. I would definitely appreciate your taking a couple minutes to fill out the evaluation. It's only going to take about 3 to 4 minutes. Your feedback is really helpful to me as an educator into the Cultivating Success program as we look at the other topics that we would have in upcoming webinars. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a beautiful afternoon and a great week. Be well.